Before you put a breeding box for your budgies, there is something very important you need to understand, because putting it at the wrong time can actually cause more problems than benefits. A lot of people think once they have a pair, they can just add a nest box and breeding will start, but in reality, timing is very important. If your birds are not ready, they can become stressed, aggressive, or even ignore the box completely. In this video, I'm going to share my real experience and explain exactly when you should introduce a breeding box, so you can avoid common mistakes and give your birds the best chance to breed successfully. Before you even think about adding a breeding box, the first thing you need to look for is whether your budgies are actually ready to breed, because not all birds are ready at the same time. For example, one of the first signs you will notice is a change in their behavior. In my experience, when budgies are ready, they become more active and more interested in each other. You might see the male bird trying to feed the female, which is a very strong sign that they are bonding and preparing for breeding. Another thing to look for is the female's behavior. She may start exploring corners, chewing things, or showing interest in small spaces, which means she is looking for a place to nest. You may also notice more interaction between the pair, like sitting closer together, making more sounds, or following each other around. These are all natural signs that your birds are getting ready, and this is the stage where you should start paying attention. If you don't see these signs, it usually means your birds are not ready yet, and putting a breeding box too early can actually confuse them or cause stress. So instead of rushing, it's always better to observe your birds carefully, because their behavior will tell you everything you need to know. Another important thing is patience, because sometimes people expect birds to be ready very quickly, but in reality, it can take time. In my experience, waiting and observing is always better than rushing, because when birds are naturally ready, the breeding process becomes much smoother. Another very important thing you need to understand before putting a breeding box is the age of your budgies, because breeding too early can cause serious problems. A lot of beginners think that once they have a pair, they can start breeding straight away, but that is not true. In my experience, budgies should be at least around 8 to 10 months old before breeding, and even better if they are a little older and fully mature. If birds are too young, they are not physically ready, and this can lead to weak eggs, health issues, or even stress for both the male and female. The female bird especially needs to be strong and healthy, because breeding and laying eggs takes a lot of energy. If she is too young, it can affect her health badly, and in some cases it can even be dangerous. Another thing to consider is maturity, not just age. Some birds may be old enough in months, but their behavior may still show they are not fully ready. That's why it's important to combine both age and behavior before making the decision. So instead of rushing into breeding, always make sure your birds are mature, healthy, and strong, because this will give you much better results and keep your birds safe. In my experience, waiting a little longer is always better than rushing too early, because strong and mature birds will always have a better breeding outcome. Before you introduce a breeding box, one of the most important things you need to prepare is your bird's diet, because breeding requires a lot of energy and nutrients. A lot of people make the mistake of adding a breeding box without improving the diet, and this can lead to weak eggs, low breeding success, or health problems. In my experience, diet plays a huge role in preparing birds for breeding, and you can clearly see the difference when birds are properly fed. For example, along with seeds, you should also provide soft food like boiled egg, soaked seeds, and fresh vegetables. These foods help improve the strength and condition of your birds, especially the female, who will need extra nutrition during egg laying. Calcium is also very important, because it helps in forming strong eggshells and supports the female's health. If birds are not getting enough nutrients, they may not breed properly or may face health issues later. So instead of rushing to put a breeding box, always focus on improving their diet first, because this is what prepares them internally for breeding. When birds are healthy, strong, and well fed, the breeding process becomes much smoother and more successful. In my experience, once I improved the diet before breeding, I noticed a big difference in how active and ready my birds were, and this made the whole process much easier. Before you add a breeding box, you also need to make sure that your birds are in the right environment, because even if your birds are ready, a poor setup can stop them from breeding properly. In my experience, budgies need a calm and stable environment before breeding, not too much noise, not too much disturbance, and not constant changes around them. For example, if you keep moving the cage, changing things too often, or placing them in a busy area, it can make birds feel unsafe and stressed. Another important thing is space, because birds should have enough room to move freely and feel comfortable in their surroundings. If the cage is too small or overcrowded, it can affect their behavior and reduce the chances of successful breeding. Lighting also plays a role, because birds respond to light and seasonal changes. A natural light cycle or a stable light routine helps birds feel more comfortable and ready. In my experience, when birds are in a calm, clean and stable environment, they behave very differently. They become more relaxed, more active and more ready to breed. So before you even think about adding a breeding box, make sure your setup is right, because this creates the foundation for everything that comes next. Even small changes in environment can affect birds, so it's always better to keep things consistent and avoid sudden changes when preparing for breeding. Now, after everything we talked about, behavior, age, diet and environment, the big question is, when should you actually put the breeding box? In my experience, the right time to introduce a breeding box is when you clearly see that your birds are active, healthy, bonding well and showing natural breeding behavior. For example, when the male is feeding the female regularly, when they are spending more time together, and when the female is showing interest in small spaces or chewing, these are strong signs. This is the moment when adding a breeding box makes sense, because the birds are already preparing naturally. If you put the box too early, before these signs, birds may ignore it completely or even become stressed. But when the timing is right, birds will quickly accept the box and start using it naturally. In my experience, timing is everything. You are not forcing the birds, you are just giving them the option at the right moment. So the best time to put a breeding box is not based on a fixed date, it's based on your bird's behavior and readiness. Sometimes people ask how long they should wait, and the answer is simple: wait until your birds show clear signs. Rushing will not help, but waiting for the right moment will give much better results. Once you place the breeding box, you need to give your birds some time to adjust, because not all birds will go inside straight away. In my experience, some budgies may take a few days, while others may take longer, and that is completely normal. At the beginning, you might see the male bird going near the box or checking it first, because males are usually more curious. After that, the female will slowly start showing interest, going inside, exploring and getting comfortable. This is a very important stage, because this is where birds start accepting the breeding box as their space. You may also notice that the pair becomes more protective of the area, which is a natural behavior during breeding time. Another thing to remember is not to disturb them too much during this stage, because too much interference can make birds feel unsafe and delay the process. In my experience, patience is very important here. Once birds feel comfortable, everything starts happening naturally. So after placing the box, don't rush or expect instant results, just observe and let your birds adjust at their Sometimes people get worried if birds don't go inside immediately, but that's completely normal. Every pair is different, and giving them time is always the best approach. Before finishing, it's very important to talk about some common mistakes people make when adding a breeding box, because these mistakes can stop breeding completely or even harm your birds. One of the biggest mistakes is putting the breeding box too early, before the birds are ready. In my experience, this usually leads to birds ignoring the box or becoming stressed instead of breeding. Another common mistake is not preparing the diet properly, because without the right nutrition, birds don't have the strength needed for breeding. Some people also disturb the birds too much after placing the box, checking inside constantly, which can make the birds feel unsafe. Overcrowding is another issue, where too many birds are kept in one space, which can lead to fighting and stress. In my experience, avoiding these simple mistakes makes a huge difference, because when everything is done at the right time and in the right way, birds behave naturally and the breeding process becomes much smoother. So instead of rushing or forcing things, always focus on doing things correctly, because this is what leads to successful and safe breeding. Sometimes small mistakes don't show immediate problems, but over time they can affect your birds, so it's always better to do things properly from the beginning. Before you decide to breed your budgies, there is one more important thing you should think about, and that is whether breeding is the right choice for you. Breeding budgies is not just about putting a box and waiting for eggs, it also comes with responsibility, time and proper care. For example, you need to be ready to take care of baby birds, provide extra food and make sure everything is safe and clean. In my experience, breeding can be very rewarding, but only if you are prepared and understand what is involved. If you are not ready, it's always better to wait and focus on keeping your birds healthy first. So before starting breeding, always make sure you are ready, because this will make the whole process much easier and better for your birds. So overall, knowing when to put a breeding box for your budgies is very important, and it really comes down to understanding your birds rather than rushing the process. In my experience, when you focus on the right signs like behavior, age, diet and environment, everything becomes much easier and more natural. Breeding is not something you force, it's something you support at the right time. I hope this video helped you understand the right approach and avoid common mistakes when preparing your budgies for breeding. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you in the next video.